Welcome to the Chuan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, qigong, and meditation. We are getting near the end of our discussion of T.T. Liang. We got one more after this. In this episode, we discuss first a little more about his early life, how he got into Tai Chi, meeting Cheng Man Ching, what training with Cheng Man Ching was like, and then a little story about one of his buddies that he used to hang out with, a certain Mr. Yang. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking with us, and take care of yourselves.
In today's episode, we're returning to the story of the Tai Chi master T.T. Liang, who lived to 102 years old. And his book, Steal My Art by Stuart Olson, details some of the stories of his life. We've reached a point in 1945 where T.T. has been living in China as a customs agent and living a life of, shall we say, action and adventure and drugs and drinking and whoring, pretty much. Now, he has only 2 months to live. In 1945, Liang was placed in a hospital because he had contracted pneumonia, which was complicated by the fact that he also had syphilis, gonorrhea, and a dysfunctioning liver. The diagnosis was very bad, and he was given no more than 2 months to live. He was initially very angry, blaming everyone who he considered responsible for his illness, friends who encouraged his drinking and drug use, those who enticed him into excessive gambling, and those who supported his daily activities with prostitutes. He recalls thinking that if he ever got better, he would have them all killed. I mean, daily activity with prostitutes, this guy is like blowing dough by the thousands, on a daily basis. Plus using the highest quality pharmaceuticals.
Getting loaded.
This guy is just living the dream in 1945. Everyone else is getting bombed and tortured to death, but he's living the life of just a rock star, basically. And then he's gonna have all of them killed. I love that. Like, is this guy just at rock bottom or what?
Yeah, well.
So then he has a dream. While lying in his hospital bed, he begins having dreams of his mother, a pious Buddhist, who constantly tried to get her young son to behave and grow up with a solid moral temperament. Liang always says she must have been a saint to even attempt such an impossible goal. As a child, he thought himself too stubborn and wild, and as an adult, too proud and aggressive. I mean, he's 45 at this point. The guy is just like a completely lost cause. Anyways, his mother, right around the time she was dying, she told him, get out of the customs service and move far away from all the wealthy and powerful people who are wrongly influencing your life. She feared for his life as well as for his karma. And so he keeps having these vivid dreams. Yeah, I mean, and he keeps dreaming about her and all the people who tried to steer him away. And like, it's interesting because a lot of these martial arts masters, their stories about poverty and suffering and how their life totally sucks. They just in these wartime situations. If it's not the Boxer Rebellion, it's the freaking warlord period, the Japanese War, like the Civil War. Like these people are going through hard times, whereas his problem is his times are too good. He's just living too large. He's too rich. He needs to get away from all these rich people and give up his wealth, or that's going to destroy him.
He's exploiting the opportunity, right?
Yeah, it's like you can't win. Either you're too poor, or even if you're super rich, now you're even worse shape. So by this time he was in Taiwan. So since he was so wealthy, he had himself admitted to a Catholic hospital in Taipei. One day he noticed a plaque hanging on the wall, which read, "Love thy neighbor." Upon seeing the plaque, he was instantly reminded of how his mother would attempt to teach him that hate kills the hater, not the hated. Something snapped inside of him. In an instant, he forgave everyone and saw that his problems were his own fault. After Liang left the hospital, word went out that he wanted to learn Tai Chi. His best friend on the police chief of Taipei told him about Professor Cheng Man Ching, a disciple of Yang Cheng Fu. Acquiring a person of Liang's stature as a student would have been a great honor for any teacher, and it certainly raised Cheng's rank as well. Liang was very well known in Taiwan, having friendships with the upper echelon of Taiwan's elite. So it was no small matter for Cheng that Liang became his student. Liang always claims that Cheng was his best teacher and that he holds the highest respect for him. These are not polite or empty words. He sincerely believes them. Although Liang readily admits that Cheng was a cruel, arrogant, and intimidating teacher, he believes that if Cheng wasn't that way, he wouldn't have reached the levels that he did. Liang also credits his association with Cheng as opening the door to meeting many other skilled teachers. So I like how he doesn't put Cheng Man Ching on a pedestal. He recognizes the guy's skill, but also he was basically a cruel, arrogant asshole. But like I've had many flawed teachers over the years, and he makes a point that if you're not sort of harsher than the average person, you may not have had the wherewithal to make it to the higher levels of skill, right? Like there's something that makes sense about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of that. Someone pushes you a little bit to try harder, right? So there's
Right.
lots of ways to
I mean, if
do
you're
that.
too nice, if you're too nice of a person, then you don't do the rude things that it might take to reach a higher level of training. And, you might have to sneak in a door or steal something or do, you know what I mean? You might have to do something unethical in order to
Right. Well,
reach those higher levels of skill.
yeah, and there's also the thing where the teacher says, oh, you'll never get this as a way of getting you to,
Mm,
work on that particular skill or
right,
whatever. Like we've heard that
right,
over and over with these guys.
right,
So and I've heard from other people, that from other branches of Chen Manching's lineage, some stories that, they're not so flattering. And mostly what you end up with is just like everybody else. He's just a guy who has some issues and maybe good at some things and not so good
right.
at other
He may
things.
be a saint in certain ways, but a sinner in
And
others.
at some point when Chen Manching died, somebody like they bronzed his slippers, and this kind of thing where it's like, there's a point where your admiration for someone's skill turns into, a sort of hero worship thing. And it's like,
Yeah,
I think what TT Liang is saying is, it's fine to admire the person and to, you know, uh, seek their skills, but that doesn't necessarily just because somebody's good at something doesn't mean they're good, right? Like,
right,
it's the same as like someone who has money, right? We tend to make assumptions about people, based on their status, right? Shit. And that, when somebody's of a particular status, they're given sort of leeway in other and I think that really tends to happen a lot with teachers where you only see them in class and when they're doing their thing and they're in their little outfit for class and everything, you see them out of context and it's like they're just a normal person and that can become sort of shocking to people. I think it's like seeing your first grade
yeah,
teacher at the fair or something.
right. It's punctures the illusion.
Yeah.
The one thing that really upset Liang was Cheng Man Ching's drinking. Too many of the new, younger Western students knew that if they took Cheng out for wine, they could get him to talk about Tai Chi. In 1975, after an evening of drinking with students in Taipei, Cheng died from imbibing poisoned wine. Many times, Liang commented to me how mad he was when he heard of the particulars of Cheng's death because it did not have to happen. When Liang was with Cheng, there was an unwritten but very strict rule about keeping him away from alcohol. The newer students, especially the American ones, had really had no idea of the damage they were doing when they invited Cheng to go out drinking. Because they had such a tumultuous and difficult relationship, Cheng's death truly had a profound effect on Liang's life. It took him years to come to grips with it, and he went into a deep and major depression. So and here they include some of the words from Cheng wrote eulogy for Professor Cheng, talking about his feelings about after he died, and yeah, he was really mad. He felt like it didn't have to happen. It sounds like he was mad at Master Cheng, but he was mad at the students. Um, and they had a tough relationship. I think TT was kind of older. He may have been a couple years older than Cheng, and was higher in status than him, but yet became his student and was under him in a martial arts level. So they had a different type of relationship than your average student teacher situation. Um, so he talks a little bit about his training with Master Cheng. In Taiwan, I had 15 martial arts teachers. From the Tai Chi point of view, I considered Professor Cheng the best. Why? Because he had acquired most of the higher techniques and could apply them to me effectively and easily. Once he knocked me out so hard I could not get up by myself and had to get helped up by my fellow student. During the time I was studying with him, I was at a loss as how he could do the technique so well, and I could do nothing to prevent it, even though I had learned from him for quite a long time. When we came to a parting of the ways, I practiced for a long period of time, 12 years, reflecting on what he had taught me, learning from other teachers and from books. I found that what he had taught me was perfectly correct and accurate. Now I can apply most of the techniques to my students as effectively and easily as he did to me once. One technique called receiving energy I have been practicing for many years, but still cannot acquire the higher levels of it. Professor Cheng had not acquired it either.
I mean, it sounds like he really did respect the guy, but also,
Complex
complex
relationship.
relationship. Yeah, exactly.
Now he talks about an incident in the Tai Chi world that has gone around. A student of Professor Cheng recently told me that he went to visit Mr. Kuo Lian Ying in San Francisco. When he arrived, Mrs. Kuo received him in the reception hall, where the student sat down. But as soon as he did, Mrs. Kuo immediately became furious, pounding her fists on the table, and said to him, "It's impolite to sit down while you're waiting for a man who is your senior and a Tai Chi authority. Show your respect. You'd better stand up." But the student would not yield, sat there refusing to move, and refused her request. Just then, Mr. Kuo came out of the inner chamber to interview the student. Mr. Kuo said, "Do you know how your Tai Chi teacher Chang died?" The student answered, "I don't know exactly." Mr. Kuo said, "When doing pushing hands with some students, he harassed them. He got knocked down and he died later." Mr. Kuo said nothing more and left. Whoo, harsh.
Well, he was a real
He's a real asshole too.
yeah, I know two people who studied with him in San Francisco in the like early 60s or something. One guy said that if you couldn't like hold your leg out straight and squat down to the floor, he would just kind of like shake his head at you like, ugh, waste my time.
Right. Very high expectations
Yeah.
is a common theme among these older generation.
Mm-hmm.
So TT goes on. Of course, what Mr. Kuo said is not true. But why did he say that? Because my teacher did not believe in the idea of making 1,000 friends, but don't make one enemy. One must practice what he preaches, otherwise it is empty talk, or a bounce check, which is of no use. This is why Mr. Kuo said Cheng was killed by his students.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it doesn't sound like Mr. Kuo is exactly making 1,000 friends either, but it sounds similar that you don't want to, your arrogance can lead to your own downfall, basically, is my interpretation of what he's saying.
Right. Well, that's the story in your book, isn't it? With James Wing Wu taking the
It's true. Yeah,
yeah.
James Wing Wu of Los Angeles claims that he took the challenge, a challenge from Kuo to Cheng Man Ching, and relayed the message between him when they were both in the same town, but I don't think the fight ever
I mean,
happened.
the sort of way I heard it was basically this was, San Francisco uh was Guo's turf. And when Chen Man Ching came down, he was basically like, nah, you gotta go somewhere else. And that's
Mm.
why he went to the East Coast, because there wasn't anybody really established yet.
Uh-huh.
So,
So he could take over that
yeah.
space instead of yeah, that makes sense. And Kuo is a pretty feisty dude, so it sounds like
Yeah, he was a scrapper. I mean,
yeah. He goes on to say that in the memorial, the point of view of Cheng's art was expressed by one of his American students. The student said that there was not only nobody equal, but there wasn't even anyone second to him. It was also said, Cheng could be impatient, but he never was with me. He could be angry, but he never was with me. This person was very lucky. Maybe he treated him this way because he was an American, but he did not treat others so. I disagree with the personal character point of view described. Please inquire of the many of Cheng's Chinese students and consult the public opinion in Taiwan. Then a correct and accurate conclusion can be found. It's better not to blow the trumpet for anybody before he knows him well. But in one sense, the eulogy is right. To conceal the bad and make known the good is the best policy.
yeah, there's
I
no,
think he might be talking about Robert W. Smith, might have been the guy who said that.
oh, that's possible.
I think he said the quote that, like, not only was he the top, there
Right,
wasn't
right,
even
right.
a second. And I know Robert Smith was pretty impressed with the guy, and coming from a guy who was deeply involved in Gold Gloves boxing and black belt judo, who trained in Japan, like he wasn't a lightweight.
No, and I mean, there were a number of guys who, in those early days were pretty heavy hitters, as it were, who trained with him, and they all came away with the same conclusion that he
Right.
did have a certain level of skill. Now I think it's a little blown out of proportion because in China, he probably wasn't the top of the top, but
Right.
as the pool gets smaller, it's easier to be the big fish, right? And,
Right.
he was the big fish in a relatively
Right.
small
I
pond.
mean, no doubt he made a big impression.
Oh yeah, and I think the modifications that he made to the form made it possible for it to be taught in relatively short amount of time and with good results, right? So it didn't take you 10 years of daily practice with a master to get some benefit out of doing it. You
Right.
could you could learn it in a
Much more
you
accessible.
know, you could
Yeah.
learn it in a couple of weeks and then you could go and do your bad Tai Chi in the park. That was kind of, I think, most of those people in the early days, they just wanted like they were looking for a guru and some sort of physical activity that wasn't yoga.
Kind of what T.T. Liang was looking for. Liang was certain that Cheng had been poisoned, even though it could never be proven. It seems that Cheng had made few friends in Taiwan. When he was brought to the hospital the following morning, the doctors refused to help him, as they had been publicly ridiculed by him in the past. At the second hospital, a tracheotomy was performed and white fluids came gushing from his throat, a sign of poisoning. Liang had seen and heard this type of thing happening several times in Shanghai during his mafia days. He said that one of the mafia's tricks was to have a restaurant serve a man good bottles of wine for the first two, but the third is either simply a bad bottle or secretly poisoned. He says that no one knew Cheng as well, and no one studied with him for as long as Liang did. Over the years, I have heard and seen many ridiculous accounts and divisions made because of the separation between Cheng and Liang. In all honesty, both men had their faults, and both made mistakes. They were human, and with all the faults of any person, so it is quite unnecessary for anyone either to take sides or to even bother with the false politics created by later students. It always struck me as so interesting that Tai Chi, an art based on yielding and non aggression, is so filled with political gossip and aggressive attitudes. One of Liang's favorite statements should be applied more often in the Tai Chi world. Don't blame others, blame yourself. Just take what is good from a person and get rid of what's bad.
He embodied the thing of what being a Tai Chi person is really about. More, it wasn't just about being high level skill at doing the thing. It was also about like, being nice and generous and caring and all that stuff. And I think there's a piece that's, I'll strive for, things like that. He was also a jokester and would get your ass
Yeah.
arrested. So,
Right? I mean, the guy lived life on another level, man. Like,
yeah,
it's
he was
just.
having a good time.
Yeah. Well, another example of that is his relationship with General Yang Shen. So we'll just pick up a little bit of the story of General Yang Shen. It says he was a warlord during the warlord period who supported the movement of Chiang Kai-shek and escaped to Taiwan during Mao's takeover of the mainland. As tennis partners, General Yang Shen and T.T. Liang became very good friends. They also shared a common interest in Taoism. Yang had been the one to convince the immortal Li Qing-yun, the only verified Taoist who lived to be 250 years old, to come live and lecture in 1936. One day after they had finished playing tennis, General Yang invited Liang to his house for dinner. As they drove in Yang's limousine through Taipei, Yang saw a really beautiful girl walking along the street. He immediately ordered the driver to stop and gave him instructions to introduce General Yang and find out if she would be interested in becoming his concubine. The driver did as he was told. Liang could see the man talking with the girl, and they were laughing. Liang turned to General Yang. You lost. She's laughing about it and is not taking your driver seriously. Moments later, the driver returned to the car. Yang immediately asked him what her response was. The driver turned to him and said, Sir, she already is your concubine. She's here visiting her family on a break from school in New York. She said that you two have never met, and she did not want to presume to do so now. She also said to say thank you and express her gratefulness for putting her through medical school. Are you kidding me?
What?
I mean, this is just a whole different universe. Like, what the hell? Yang burst out laughing and told him to drive on. He then said to Liang, This is a stalemate. She's my concubine, but's too afraid to talk to me. Yang had well over 300 concubines, most of whom he had never met. Many were in different schools around the world, and many others were simply given money to live so that they and their parents would not suffer. Liang explained to me that not all concubines were chosen for sexual reasons. In many cases, Yang's officers offered their daughters as concubines to him as a gesture of gratitude. The Chinese, Liang expounded, have always maintained these networks of people, which always had more to do with loyalty and support than with sex. Westerners, he said, have always been confused about the concubine system. Besides, Yang was one of the kindest men Liang had ever met, And he really just wanted to help those families who had served him well in China. This dude was from the warlord period, rampaging across China in the 1920s in an all-out, no, completely chaotic anarchy, just massacring each other and then fighting the Japanese, fighting the Civil War. And yet he's one of the nicest guys Liang ever met.
Right.
There
Well,
must be so much more to that story than you can even picture.
right. That's where it's the opposite of the Cheng Man Ching thing, right? Where he's doing what the Americans were doing to Cheng Man Ching.
I mean, and it's interesting to run across this because in our podcast, we've been exploring different stages of Chinese history in the 20th century and all the different very rough periods of time. So here's another example of a guy who had been through all those periods of time, similar to like Liu Hongzhi, the master that we've been sort of centering it all around. And yet here he's on the winning side of the warlord period, and not only that, he manages to make it to Taiwan and escape execution at the hands of the PLA. So, and yet maintains his wealth and prestige. He's playing tennis, driving around in a limousine after surviving that just the most tumultuous period of history with over 300 concubines.
Yeah,
So it goes on to talk about Taoism more. Many people in Taiwan rumored that Yang had achieved his longevity and youthfulness from practicing the sexual arts with his numerous concubines, saying that he prolonged his life by sleeping with his concubines and borrowing their feminine forces to fortify his health. Li Qingyong had 14 lives during his long life, the guy who lived 250 years, and everyone assumed that General Yang had secretly learned these sexual arts from him. T.T. Liang remembers Yang only laughing under his breath when he heard these rumors and coyly denying them by saying, "No, the only way to keep in good health is to sweat." Yang's primary hobby in his advanced years was to lead people to climb mountains and go jogging, in which he was always the quickest and most sure-footed. Liang also remembers him as one of the humblest and gentlest people he ever met, saying that Yang had no hatred, no ego. Yang always claimed that he had nothing to teach, so nothing or no one could bother him. Liang claimed that General Yang's mind was always completely at rest, which is why he could live so long in such good health, retaining a youthful appearance and energy even into old age. He died peacefully at age 98. Some claim he was 115, but no one was able to exactly determine his true age. So it sounds like he was involved with Taoist alchemy, some of which Taoist sexual practices are often interwoven.
well, I mean, Liang lived to be 102, so maybe he picked up some of that.
He was doing something right, obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, Taoist alchemy is something that we talked a lot about on the Patreon, reading Baihua's book about his process of the microcosmic orbit and using that to completely use the spire method Taoism to transform your inner self. And then there's the water method of E.K. Francis, where he uses dissolving to do similar stuff. And then there's the sexual techniques that are always been a part of Taoism, even from thousands of years ago. They were talking about it, so it's been a sort of undercurrent that's involved. Other masters in Taiwan taught that as part of their thing. So it's an area we'll eventually have to touch on a little bit, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that piece of like there's modes of practice, right? So you can do it in standing, moving, sitting, do martial arts, sex. Those are all ways you can, weave Taoist practices into your life.
One of the things he was well known for was the two-person form of Yang style Tai Chi, which is a long form of back and forth applications that you do. And he famously put it to music in order to make it easier to learn and get people to get into the rhythm of it and sort of avoid the clashing of combat, but still teach you the techniques and get something out of it. So I want to, and it's actually the first Tai Chi form I ever learned was the two-person form, because at age 17, I was not able to do a Tai Chi form without being just too impatient and ignorant. But the two-person form was interesting. Me and my friend did it because it was like, now we could actually hit each other a little bit. So that was a great introduction for the young and vigorous. So creating the two-person dance. As I have stated, said T.T. Liang, I have learned Tai Chi from many teachers, and I have taught the three primary Tai Chi self-defense exercises. In Chinese, these are called San Shou, dispersing hands, Tui Shou, pushing hands, and Ta Lu, greater rollback. San Shou normally consists of 88 postures and is performed with many stepping and turning movements, which simulate the applications of all the Tai Chi postures. Tui Shou is a series of exercises which can be done in fixed stance or with active stepping, Primarily, they teach yielding and neutralizing, as well as the functional use of ward off, roll back, press, and push. Ta Lu is another series of exercises which can be performed either fixed or with active steps. Their main purpose is to teach seizing and enticing, as well as the functional use of pull, split, elbow stroke, and shoulder stroke. What I did was combine all these exercises into one dance so that all three could be practiced at one time. Thus, my 178 posture two-person dance. So he makes the distinction between Tuisho push hands as teaching yielding and neutralizing, whereas Da Lu teaches seizing and enticing. And I think that's interesting. Da Lu is the one that has the shoulder and elbow attacks. And it has a arm bar in it as well, and pulling down and yanking. So that seizing and enticing is every bit as much a part of Tai Chi as the yielding and neutralizing. Although if you ask me, the yielding and neutralizing is more important in the sense that that's Tai Chi's best skills. But if you combine that with the seizing and enticing, you got a kind of nice combination of moves there.
Right. I mean, the whole thing of Tai Chi is you have to learn how to essentially not resist force, that you have to move with the other person's force. So both push hands and Dalu are just kind of different patterns of learning how to move with someone else. So you get used to the spatial awareness, the contact. And then if you're going to go to the next step of doing actual fighting applications, once you can do everything sort of at touch, right, then you can start with, well, now what do you do with the space between you and another person? Because that's actually a harder thing to deal with. I mean, before you get into unpredictable things, you want to be really good at the patterns, and it's just a way of conditioning yourself, basically. But it's Tai Chi conditioning, which is doing these gentle techniques, right?
So it goes on to say that the two-person dance involves moving with a partner, should be performed to music. Every posture consists of 3 movements done in slow motion. They are neutralize, seize, and attack. The dance will teach you that when someone strikes at you, it is necessary to first neutralize the attack, then seize or attach to the limb of the opponent's body, and then strike back. You will be able to do this properly only after a great deal of practice. Although it is done slowly in the two-person dance, after a period of time, all 3 movements will be performed very quickly.
Well, it must be a waltz if it's 3s.
1 dun dun bum bum bum. Yeah, that sounds about right.
That makes sense because he was a ballroom dancer. I think T.T. Liang's big thing was similar to Cheng Man Ching. You're not teaching Vietnam vets in the jungle, you're teaching dudes with desk jobs and housewives, and
right,
not necessarily interested in
right. And yet applications are essential to Tai Chi to really understand it and get the most from it. So he found the perfect way to get people to do it without freaking out and still get the benefit. So it's kind of a genius move on his part. At least you got everything in one place. Well, good talk. T.T. Liang remains one of the more interesting Tai Chi masters that we talked about yet.
All right, man. Take care.
See ya.
Hey, folks. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for listening. We have a Instagram where we post images to go along with the episode, so check that out. And be sure to check out our Patreon for extended episodes, bonus episodes, and exclusive content. All right. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and be well.